Hey everyone, and welcome to another movie review. This one's going to be a little bit different from my other ones because it's an actual story in the Bible. So, what I'm going to do is break down different scenes and compare them to how they unfold in the Bible, and I'll end it with my review. For this movie, I knew that there were going to be some changes because it's for kids, but, anyways, on with the review. The Lord says to Samuel, saying that Saul didn't follow the commandments. He isn't fit to be king anymore. And so when Samuel goes to confront Saul and say this, they have a whole conversation talking about it. And obviously Saul doesn't like that. God doesn't want him to be king anymore. And he tries to say, I did do what he wanted me to do, but there were things that he didn't do. He tries to apologize in a sense. And then Samuel's like, nope, you've been rejected as king. And when he turns, Saul seizes the edge of his robe and it tears. And then Samuel turns and says, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you, which is a crazy thing to say. And that scene in the movie plays out kind of similarly. Samuel just tells Saul that you're not going to be king anymore. And Saul does actually tear his robe, but they don't have a full-blown conversation about it. And then Samuel walks off dramatically with the storm. But that's more so farther into the movie, not the beginning, but that's just where it is in the Bible. I did think that the whole scene with David and the sheep was interesting, but I was pretty confident that David killed the lion. So I was surprised when he didn't kill the lion in the movie because I thought that the lion had died. And they're like, well, actually, it's alive. It's just stuck. Anyways, the Lord tells Samuel that there's going to be a new king and he has to go anoint him and he's going to be from the house of Jesse. And so he goes there, taking with him a cow for a sacrifice so that way no one's suspicious of him being there. And so he goes there. Jesse calls forth his sons. He looks at all of them and he says no and asks if that's all the young men that they have. To which they reply, there's the youngest and he's out with the sheep. Jesse sends for him. He comes and the Lord tells him to anoint him because he is the one. And in the movie, it's a bit different. Samuel kind of just pops up and is just there, chilling. And then David enters the house with a bunch of sheep. But other than that, it goes in a similar fashion, though the guards come looking for David to play music, which does connect within the Bible, which says that when upon Saul there fell a distressing spirit, he then sent for the son of Jesse to play to him, which is different in the movie because I'm pretty sure in the Bible it just says that they sent just for David. But in the movie, they have a whole line of people coming to play for him. I guess I see the use of having multiple people so they can have the song Shalom play with a bunch of different instruments, which was cool. And obviously, David was chosen to play music to him. And whenever he would play, he would become refreshed and relaxed. Now, one thing I did notice that was very different was the whole sequence with David and Goliath, but also the events leading up to that. The scene plays out very similarly in both the Bible and the movie, where David is sent with food to give to his brothers, and they report back with news of what's going on. He gets there. Goliath is saying things that are not good, and the men gathered there are discussing Goliath, and they mention that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and his father's house. Which is interesting. The last part about his giving him his daughter wasn't in the movie. We also don't even see his daughter at all. They don't exist here. And then David asks who will kill him, this Philistine who defies the armies of the living God. And his oldest brother is getting upset with him and is like, why did you come here? And who did you leave the sheep with? And I know your pride and insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David's like, what have I done now? And it's like, first of all, he was sent to give them food. He's not just being there because he wants to be there. And then he spoke back to the crowd and said things that were then reported back to Saul. And when David was brought before Saul, he basically is like, I'll go fight him. And Saul's like, no, you're not going to. You can't. He's like, you're too young. You can't fight him. And then David's like, and this is, what I'm reading is 1 Samuel 17:34 through 37. And it says, but David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Which is kind of similar to what's said in the movie, just a little different, not as long, but generally it's pretty similar. And then both follow the same story of David gets the armor, it's too big, he takes it off, and he goes out with his staff and chooses 5 smooth stones from the brook and puts them in his shepherd's bag with his sling. And so in the movie, he walks up in the field of poppies, which I think are really cool because to me it signifies the bloodshed in that valley between the two hillsides, and also it just looks really, really cool. And then David approaches Goliath. Goliath steps forward, and then Goliath feels like he's being made a joke in a sense because they're saying this tiny little kid, and Goliath is huge. I don't remember the exact height measurements, but he is ginormous, super tall. And he's saying all these things, and he's like, oh, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David, just completely unfazed, says in 1 Samuel 17:45 through 47, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And from this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Anyways, so then Goliath is like, okay, and goes to fight David. But in the movie, he says something along the lines of killing God and becoming a god or godlike. And in both, Goliath approaches him, David approaches him as well, draws the sling, puts the rock in the sling, he slings it, strikes the Philistine in his forehead, and then Goliath falls and dies. And he dies. Now, in the movie, he doesn't behead him for obvious reasons. And the Philistines were like, oh, they just killed our biggest guy. And they run. And all the Israelites go and charge after them. It looked really cool in the movie. And that happened in both. And I'm pretty sure that he doesn't ask in the movie, but in the Bible, Saul asks who David's father is, to which David then replies, Jesse from Bethlehem. After that, we then see Jonathan give David his robe. They form a tight bond. And from that point forward, Saul then grows a resentment and dislike towards David. And although not stated in the movie, in the Bible, when they're going through the streets after returning home from defeating the Philistines, the woman saying, 1 Samuel 18:7, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s, which I don't actually understand why they say that. But regardless, Saul doesn't like that. And that starts off the whole trail of his dislike towards David. And that kind of continues similarly in both the Bible and the movie. Now, what is very different, and I read later, was the fact that David married one of Saul's daughters. And I did not know that. And I felt kind of bad for not knowing that. But that was completely not in the movie at all whatsoever. And I'm pretty sure during the song Follow the Light, we do see them go back out to war, Saul, Jonathan, and David, which is mentioned in the Bible. That does happen. Except obviously it skips the whole David getting married, which could be an oversight or not. Just like it did happen, they just didn't show it. And the scene that is pretty much the same is when Saul grabs a spear and throws it at David, attempting to kill him but misses, which was quite startling in the movie because I was expecting it but I wasn't prepared for it, which he does that. And in the movie, he runs out frantically and Saul tells Jonathan to shoot David, shoots the strap holding a statue so it falls and David can escape. And David's running around through the town, grabs a cloak. He actually sees his brothers. The eldest was willing to turn him in, which sucks. And then he runs to the temple. There's one priest there. He grabs a sword, takes it, leaves, and just runs into the wilderness. And then soldiers go to David's home to also, I'm assuming, either find him or kill his family. Not entirely sure. And that's the movie. Whereas in the Bible, David flees Saul, goes to his wife, and then leaves from her. has interactions with Jonathan at multiple points, goes to different places, tries to escape. Saul's chasing after him, goes to a temple where, and contrary to the movie, rather than being one priest, I think the number was 80 something, and he had them all killed, all of them, because they, in a sense, harbored David and then didn't turn him in. And it continues to go on like that for quite a few chapters of this running back and forth. And at some point, David does meet up with a group of people who, in a sense, are on his side. And when he does that, they're in this cave thing. And when Saul comes into an area of the rock formation to sleep, David cuts a corner of his robe, in contrary to what people who are with him want him to do, which is to kill Saul. He does not. Whenever Saul wakes, David goes out, confronts him, and says, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Pretty much. Which is similar to what happens in the movie, except Saul isn't sleeping. So I don't know how he cut it when he wasn't sleeping. And following that in the movie, David and the people who are with him, they go to an abandoned city. They set up for their stay there, and because it was abandoned and Saul wouldn't go near it because it's where the Amalekites used to be. And then David makes a plan to go disguised as Philistine while they confront Saul's army. And then when they start fighting, they notice the smoke from the city and they run back and everyone's gone. In the Bible, it says that when they went to find the Amalekites, that it was very similar to what happened with the movie, because they went up there and everyone was just greatly distressed and grieved. And back with the battle with the Philistines and the Israelites, Saul does die in both the movie and what actually happens in the Bible, though there's a description in the Bible of how that happens. But that part is the same. And then in the movie, David goes back to Israel and Jonathan gives him a robe and he's the new king. And then he tears the edge of the robe. But in the Bible, it's different than what actually happens. Actually, it's much, much different. And Jonathan's not actually there. But it's very interesting. It's a very light ending for the movie, but it's not as light in the Bible. Regardless, there are a lot of similar things. And for a child, I think that they did a really good job getting most of the information out there of what really happened with David. Though I have also been interested in watching The House of David, which is a bit more realistic and accurate interpretation of the events that occurred. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I definitely recommend it. It was super cute. I love the music. That was done really well. As for my rating, for story and plot, I give it a 9 because it did a good job of expressing the story and plot and kept it engaging, especially for a younger audience. For characters and acting, I would say 8 because they portrayed the characters somewhat accurately, again, for a kids movie. And the acting was good too. For visuals and cinematography, I'd say 9 because it looked really well done. The animation was really cool. For sound and music, I would definitely do a 10. I love the music so much. I've been listening to the soundtrack for like weeks now at this point. As for pacing and editing, I would do 8 because it was really quick and things were skipped over and rushed, which you can't really feel it, but in comparison to what actually happened, it does seem really cut and paste. Emotional impact, I would give that an 8 because there were some hard things and emotional things going on. For originality, I give it a 7. I don't really know how to rate that because it's based on something else, but I haven't seen anything like this. For what it was, being like a retelling in a sense of the story, it did a good job of putting its own twist on it, but it didn't really give all the information. And finally, for enjoyment value, I would give it a 9 because I really liked it. I would definitely see it again. And that brings us to an 8.8, which is pretty high, which it was a really good movie. So I'm not surprised with that rating. Let me know your guys' thoughts on the movie down in the comments if you have seen it, or any upcoming movies that you would be interested in me doing a review for. But that's all for now. Hope you all have a blessed day and peace out.